it. I'll be glad to be sharing this session afterwards. Thank you everyone for joining. I'm actually going to leave the lines open, so feel free to interact, ask questions, make commentary if you know of any further information about the topic I'm speaking on. Truthfully, I am not a REST API expert, although I have done quite extensive testing and training myself and gotten to a point where as a beginner user of it in Workforce Ready, I know probably many questions that you all as a group will run into yourselves working with clients or trying to navigate the waters yourselves starting out. So the purpose of this meeting is to give you some context and give you some tools to work with to get you going with REST API. So first question that folks will have about REST API is, what is it? And I've actually gotten a few of those questions as a result of having sent this meeting invite out. People say, well, what am I going to spend an hour with you about learning about REST API? I'm not even sure what it is. Well, if you have worked with SOAP before, REST API is our next generation web services architecture. Web services are used to send and receive data from our platform. It uses HTTP to make different types of calls, and it is platform and language independent. So the reason we switched from SOAP to REST is because it's lightweight and has some additional functionality. And so one quote that I thought that was really helpful to provide some context around REST API is that the World Wide Web itself in many ways can be thought of as a REST-based architecture because it uses HTTP calls to send and receive data. So why REST? REST APIs allow us to do many things. The three broad topics that I can think of are third-party application development, interface development, and custom data reporting. Fun fact, Workforce Ready's next generation mobile application is used entirely using REST APIs. So great use case, great example to be thinking about what REST APIs are capable of doing. You can essentially create a whole new application and a whole new platform because you can send and receive pretty much the same data as you would from simply logging into Workforce Ready from the main web-based platform. So I'm going to throw in some frequently asked questions that I've already gotten or thought of myself throughout these slides. One I've gotten a few times is, does this replace middleware? And the short answer is no. And so I've created this infographic here to help you think about where REST API falls into the picture of the big scheme here. So remember, as I had mentioned before, REST API is the next generation of web services from SOAP APIs. But middleware is actually more than just an API. Middleware is a product that's a GUI-based product that's wrapped around Windows services, which leverages SOAP APIs to send and receive data from a desktop or a server. So REST APIs are a more elegant way of sending and receiving data, but it does not replace the fact that there's a GUI-based application that imports and exports information using Windows services for you. Okay, so
training.
One second, I'm going to mute caller number 8. Sorry if you had something to say. Use the text box. So before we get started, one thing to know here is there should be some familiar pictures and graphics throughout this presentation. To turn on REST API, you actually have to go into the company information screen, marketplace, and enable it. Now, for some of you folks, the company marketplace might not be available based on your security settings. But if you do need to enable REST APIs and you don't have access to it, you'll want to either contact your manager or your dedicated Kronos project manager to turn it on for you. Now, this link here takes us to our REST API testing webpage. This is going to be your Bible for the latest list of invocations and REST API functionality, it is always going to be up to date. So any references to information here, I just want to put this up front and out loud, you'll want to use this link to determine what the latest information is for REST APIs. And you can share this with your customers. In fact, I encourage you to do that. It's a public-facing website, and it should be leveraged by anyone who needs to use the REST API functionality. So there are 3 steps to using REST APIs, at least that I've broken it down into. And step 1 is authentication. So a good question you might get is, why would I need a token to use REST APIs? And you do need a token when I've got a username and password. It's a security setting that prevents users from indefinitely using REST APIs without the knowledge of the person actually who owns that username and password. I've posted this invocation to the login authentication URL here. Now, one thing I've learned from our product management team is that this may change in the future. So again, I'll refer back to the previous slide. Any links or documentation should be confirmed using our test and training website here before you recommend it for a client. And one tidbit here, just to always keep in the back of your pocket, and you'll forget about it once you start using it, is that your token, which we'll see a little bit more of in future slides, is about a 20-digit character string that needs to be prefixed by the word bearer and string when using it. So probably more information than you need right now, but it'll be good for you to remember that, referencing back if you do end up supporting a client authenticating using REST APIs. So quick exercise for you folks. I have given this presentation to a number of people now, and I'd say the success rate is anywhere between 25 and 50%. But this is an exercise for you, so go ahead and open up your web browsers. And what I would like for you to do is follow these steps to authenticate yourself. And what I will do here is I will pause the screen sharing here, and I will put this first URL in our chat box here. And the first step you need to take is to actually encode your workforce-ready login credentials, sorry, your password only, and to use this URL here to try and authenticate using HTTP in any browser. So I put both of those URLs in there. First step is going to be to go to this first URL and type in your workforce-ready password and figure out what your encoded workforce-ready password is, and replace these orange text letters here with your credentials, so your username and your encoded password. And I would love to hear the first person to get it done correctly. I want to see who's the fastest in the group. Rob, you're too good at this. I think I'm going to wait for the second person. While you're doing it, I'll just share, for whatever reason in HTTP, special characters need to be encoded a special way, meaning, for instance, I know a #, which I use for my workforce-ready password, is actually supposed to be written as %23 using HTTP. So that is a step that every user will need to take when using REST to authenticate. All right, so Danielle's confused. That means there's probably a few others confused. So your end goal here is to put this URL right here in step number 2 into your browser. So go ahead and just copy and paste that from the text box, the chat box here, into your browser. And you want to replace the bracket, username bracket, with your Workforce Ready login username. And then you want to replace the bracket, encoded password bracket, with your Workforce Ready password. Now the problem with your password is that it doesn't follow the protocol required for encoding using HTTP. So as an example down here, I've shown you for someone who has a username testEE and password Kronos #1, you have to update your credentials in here to be testEE and Kronos %231. Now to get your encoded password, you can use this URL, the first one I put up here, into the chat box and get the updated password for you to replace down here. All right, Jim Chandler, the All-Star, Chris, done. All right, we got some winners here. So I'm going to let the rest of you keep trying if you'd like. I think that's great. Now to confirm that you are an official REST API user, guys, you should see something like this in your browser. Can you confirm you've got something like this with the curly brace brackets around it? All right, awesome. We got some winners here. So you guys that are getting this response here in your browser, you are officially REST API users. So the whole point of this exercise is just to let you know that REST API isn't a big, hairy, scary thing. It's something that that you guys can do, and you've already done it within 10 minutes of learning about it. So this is a response that you get from authenticating, and your browser is just a natural REST API caller because it uses HTTP. And you see a number of things. First thing to notice here is that this is written in a code called JSON. That is the format which will come back in most cases if you don't specify a format otherwise. I'm not going to go into exactly how it's formatted here, but there's 3 pieces of information. It's your token, which is this number followed in quotes by the token. TTL, that's how much time is left remaining, and the units is the time measurement. So 3,600,000 milliseconds left until your token is no longer valid, which is in a roundabout way of saying you've got an hour with this token before you have to call a new one. So Jim, what do you have? Do you have some sort of message that comes from the browser? What does it say?
Not even sure I did it in the right spot. So
okay, all right, no worries.
Yeah.
We can take it offline if you want to dig into it a little bit further. But I'm sure as you learn more here, you'll probably figure out what to do differently. But we can take that offline. So some of you might have gotten a different response in here. Maybe your credentials weren't exactly correct. It might have given you an error message or something like that. But the truth is, if you got anything that looks like this, meaning it starts and ends with curly brace brackets, then you're actually still officially a REST API user. It's just your credentials are incorrect. So as we go through these slides, and Daniel, to answer your question, you do not need to have the brackets in there. You should remove the brackets. It's just a dynamic way of writing the example in here. So following the example down here might be helpful. If your username was testEE, you can see there's no brackets around them in the actual example. Same with the password. All right, I'm going to proceed here. So I've peppered in a few examples to give you guys examples of how the REST API calls can be made in different languages. So we just put a simple login call into the browser using an extended URL. However, in C# it might look like something like this. You've got the base URL up here, and you specify your credentials with headers below it. So you can just see that there's a little bit different way of writing it, but we're accomplishing the same thing using a C# example here. Okay, so you might be saying, well, what's the point of authenticating? And so the point is, now you can use the invocation calls, meaning now you can actually do something. You've proven that you're a valid user in whichever domain you're working in, most likely Workforce Ready for this crowd, and you can make a request for information or to send information to Workforce Ready. The base URL is typically as follows, and there are different types of calls you can make. For instance, you could pull employee schedules, you could pull a saved report, or you could use the web clock, for example. And again, for reference, the full list of invocations are in the REST API training website, which are listed throughout these slides. So one thing to keep in mind here that was alluded to in the C# example is that there are different types of headers or parameters, we'll call them, that can go along with your invocations. So while we have the URL thing figured out, meaning we know how to authenticate just using the URL, we can also add other headers to specify or further narrow down what we're trying to accomplish. For example, we've seen the JSON response, but you can actually, in some cases, ask for a comma-separated values, a text values, or an XML type of content response. You can specify exactly what you're trying to call within an invocation. For instance, if you want a saved report, you can actually name the exact report that you want to pull by using a report ID, or an export ID, or a settings ID. And then lastly, you can put filters on there. So you can specify, in some cases, if you want to filter the information down that you're receiving. So another example of how this could be leveraged using REST APIs. This case, an Excel VBA, which is a little bit more rudimentary. But here are 3 different types of parameters that you can include in your REST API call using headers. For instance, you'd like to receive the format to come back in JSON. Here is your authentication header, and so I think there's some nuance to this, but there's different ways of sending or receiving different types of data which are specified here. So content type is most likely the receiving of it, and accept is what you're sending. Another frequently asked question here is, where do I find a specific content ID? And so when you see these curly brace brackets in the invocation calls, meaning export backslash a curly brace bracket piece of information, it means it's a dynamic value that you have to specify, and it's based on how you've set things up. You guys are all well aware that your clients will have multiple different reports, multiple different exports, multiple different types of imports, and different saved reports. So these pieces of information can be found manually by making different calls as specified here, and they will return a list of the dynamic available values for you to be using here. Now, to bring it to life, you can actually go into Workforce Ready and find many of these specific content IDs specifically, and I've highlighted one way to do it in here. So you guys are all familiar, I hope, with the My Saved Reports area of Workforce Ready. You can actually pull an additional column called System ID, which coincides with the report ID specifically for saved reports. So these are the unique values associated with how you would make a call for a saved report using settings ID for that one. All right, so continuing on that thread, there's actually 2 different types of invocations for reports. So a nuance of it is you have your saved reports. There's certainly a lot of value to pull a saved report using REST APIs. Our reporting functionality is great in Workforce Ready, but it's certainly not the end-all. So if a company needs specific information formatted in a certain way or aggregated in some way, it's good to be able to pull saved reports into a third-party application. There are also global reports, and the difference is global reports aren't configurable, but they're available to everyone based on their security settings. So they're actually named using text as opposed to numbers. So for instance, using the global report invocation, I'm going to have the same exact report as the next person using this invocation, but it's going to be based on which employees fall in my employee roster, for example, on this one. And so I mentioned previously that there are different types of calls that can be made. Way back in the beginning of the slides, you can get, you can post, you can put, or you could delete using REST APIs. The get call is probably the simplest, but in the post, put, and delete calls, you can expect that there will be additional requirements. For instance, in a post call, you're actually going to be sending information to Workforce Ready using REST. And so you're going to need to actually include that information in your call, and that won't be as simple as putting a URL in a browser. You'll need a body as part of your message. So that's an additional requirement, for example, for post. For put, it's very similar. You're actually going to be changing information using the put call, so you need to have a body there as well. And delete, one helpful parameter that you're going to want to make sure you include is a filter. Otherwise, you're going to be potentially deleting more or less than you actually want to be deleting. So continuing on, here's an example of a body in a JavaScript call to create an employee-based compensation. So again, we started out just putting a URL in a browser, and we got back a token. And now we're moving past the fact that we've got headers that specify additional information about our call to having a body of information that we're actually sending as a post call to Workforce Ready. So in this case, it's not so important you understand the nuance of how this is formatted or what language this is, but simply the fact that you understand that in including this information, which looks slightly relevant to you, company, employee, effective from, amount, etc., that we are sending this information to Workforce Ready, thereby creating an interface with Workforce Ready by making a post call. Okay, and then the third step to REST API is response handling. So going back to the way we started, all REST API queries that are successful will solicit a response. In many cases, you're going to get errors with codes and messages, but in doing so, therein lies proof that you've reached our server and we're able to get a response. So knowing what to do with the response is half the battle, especially when you're receiving errors. In this case, we didn't receive an error. We got the token as we expected. Parsing this information is going to be your next step. So for many of our clients or partners, it's not enough just to get a JSON response. All you really want is the information starting at 7 and ending at 0. So parsing it is your next step. For errors, you want to understand what code 400 means, and the message provided is often very helpful. So there's a full list of errors and codes and messages response that you can troubleshoot back at our REST API documentation webpage. So just to reiterate here, we can receive the response in different formats. JSON, XML, CSV, or HTML are pretty common available options. And typically, although I don't expect any of our implementation consultants to understand programming languages, the codes and the messages can be relatively easily researched using our REST API documentation and interpreted. For instance, I've seen some very good messages come back like security error. that typically means your security profile will not allow you to access the information which you're calling using REST APIs. So that's something that you will be able to help your clients out with if you run into that issue. One very helpful hint here too is in your system administrator area, you can check, or within your client login, that is, under My Reports System REST Invocations, you can see the history of the REST API calls made against this company, and you can see the errors that they're getting. So if you have a frustrated client or partner and they don't understand why they're getting a certain error, you can actually go in and take a look at it yourself without having to ask them exactly what their results were. And that will save you some time and steps if you're in that situation. If they get a security error or they get some success, you can congratulate them or know that it's no longer an issue. One thing I do want to highlight here, since you guys will be communicating with our clients and partners on this, is that as of today, there is an API removal process that our product team will be following. It's outlined as follows. Please keep in mind that this is very important, and it's also subject to change. I would love to see REST API invocations not be removed, but if they are going to be removed, it will be a long process, 6 to 12 months approximately, in which case we will deprecate the existing API, meaning there will be documentation out there that will tell you that it's going to be removed, and then 6 to 12 months later our release notes and will be published in advance of it, and we'll actually remove the API. So all this means for you is that if your client is seeing that an API invocation is deprecated, they need to figure out what the updated version of the REST API is, and they'll have 6 to 12 months to figure out how to rewrite their program. All right, so at this point in the presentation, I do want to show you a demonstration of how this works. I've made a very rudimentary REST API tool to bring this to life for you. So this is, I'm showing an Excel spreadsheet right now. In this spreadsheet, I have set up a web clock for a test company of mine, and I want to run through an example of how this works. So basically all this web clock is doing is taking my credentials from this page, which is for my test company, and is using that to authenticate and thereby submit a punch to Workforce Ready. So in this case, what I want to do is show you, for example, a successful punch and how a response can be used to determine that you've done it correctly. So in this first line, I'm selecting my action, and I'm going to use the web clock to submit my punch. Now, my code has been written in such a way that the response from Workforce Ready is displayed as a notification within Excel, and my log is then updated so that this line has the new information. Now, for those of you who set up timesheet profiles in the past, you'll know that there's typically a redundant punch setting where if you try to punch too soon after your previous punch, it won't let you, and that's a good thing. So I'm going to try again, and I expect to get an error from our timesheet profile. And this will look familiar to you. Could not punch in less than 5 minutes from previous punch, status failure. So that's exactly what we expected, and that's based on timesheet profile settings. So just bringing this to life for you guys, that this application can be used for pretty much any programming language and has some pretty interesting implications for our clients who need to use Workforce Ready in different types of applications or different avenues. So I've covered quite a bit of ground in half an hour here. Are there any questions from the crowd? I would like to validate what I just did in Workforce Ready, and it's going to take me a second to get there. Any questions, guys? Okay. One second. So I'm going to show my screen again. And what you should be seeing now is on Monday the 22nd, the punch at 3:30 p.m. that we successfully submitted using that rudimentary Excel tool. Now, I did have that 5-minute timesheet profile rule, and just to prove that is, in fact, from the timesheet profile, in case you didn't believe me, I will go to that timesheet profile, and you will see, it's been a while since I've set this one up. There it is. Assume duplicate punch if less than 5. So what I'm going to do, just to, again, bring this to life for you guys, is I'm going to change this rule to 2 and do the same thing in Excel. So that punched me out. I'm going to punch back in. And now it says could not punch in less than 2 minutes and seconds. So that's coming directly from the timesheet profile, and I think it shows kind of the power of how these REST APIs are working. They're real time with the application, and they're able to determine your rules pretty seamlessly from a third-party application. So I think the most important thing here that I want to cover with you guys is, what's expected from you and what's not expected from you as implementation consultants of our direct clients. You're not expected to be able to write codes or programs or help troubleshoot issues that our clients might be having. Now, we do have the error codes and messages, and you can generally point them in the right direction, but there's no sense in pretending like we understand all of the different programming languages and the different applications that they're using. But you are expected to understand the framework and the benefits of REST APIs. So it's a very powerful functionality that we're going to be using more and more of, that our clients are being sold on the value of, and so you're going to be running into it inevitably. So having a good framework for this is going to be really powerful for you in providing good customer satisfaction. And this is more of an appendix at this point, but if you are interested in learning more, doing more practice, I do have some homework here for you, and so you'll follow these steps. So again, this is our documentation for REST APIs. If you want to learn about how the JSON programming language is formatted, I've provided a helpful link, and there's a Google Chrome add-on called Postman that will allow you to make some advanced REST API calls using a fairly easy framework. So that wraps up my presentation here. I see we've got a question here from the crowd here. So something about Del Boomi. I'm not sure what the question is. Could you say it out loud or elaborate?
Yeah, this is Travis. I was just wondering if Del Boomi is going to be used to access these APIs and for integration.
It's a great question. Yeah, great question. So Del Boomi is in its infancy, I'd say, right now in terms of our rollout. For those of you who aren't aware of Del Boomi, it is a aggregator of, I would say, interface information that will be leveraging REST APIs, meaning it will be a landing page for third-party applications and Workforce Ready to interface with data. We're not quite there yet. I would say it's more likely that you're going to be seeing clients writing their own REST API interfaces than leveraging Del Boomi in the next year. I'd say it's probably much more likely in the next year. So for the immediate future, I'd say not relevant, but I would say it could be a very powerful tool down the road that we'll definitely be providing you more information on if it comes to light. Any other questions, guys? Okay, wonderful. Well, feel free to give me a call or shoot me an email if you guys have any follow-ups, and we will. I'll send this out to our shared Google Drive, and you guys can follow up if you need to. Thank you.
Thanks, Zach.
You're welcome. Bye.